Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Back to winter, never mind. Right, welcome everybody, and also to those watching on live stream. Just a wee note that we will continue live streaming for today, of course, the next two lectures, and then we will cease live streaming. A decision made this morning by the committee. So those watching on live stream, I'm sorry, 3 more. A reminder, the first of a number we'll give you, that the annual meeting is on the 4th of November. We are looking for a few new committee members. So those of you who would be keen to join the committee and contribute, that would be very welcome. There'll be an opportunity to put your nomination forward for that. 4th of November annual meeting. It's worth coming to. There are a few extra little things that happen there that we'd like to see a good turnout on the 4th of November. The new interest groups, we sent the boards around last week. We had a very good response. I've got the boards out at the back today, and I'd like them to have another circuit in case there are people who weren't here last week or have had another think about it. So those will come circulating around today. Those of you at the back rows, please get that going. Thank you very much. If you're keen to be a convener for one of those groups, please put a big C beside your name. Strange, there were no C's in the last lot. Now, Emma has asked me to tell you about a lady who is going to speak here at the church on the 18th of October. Her subject is exploring women in scripture, and it's illustrated by some wonderful, beautiful quilting, I think, Emma, isn't it? Particularly, and Emma says that this is really worth coming to on the 18th of October. Cell phones, please turn them off, and I'll have to remember to do mine too. Cell phones off, and now I'd ask Joan to introduce our speaker for today.
Good morning, everybody. I'm introducing Alan Strong as our speaker today. Alan is a born and bred Cantabrian who lives in Christchurch with his wife and 2 sons. Alan works as an electrical engineer. That's his day job. And as an electrical engineer for an international consulting firm, WSP, and is the principal engineer on a number of nationally significant projects, including the Kiwi Rail redevelopment of the Hillside Workshops, the Waltham Workshops, Otera, Rimutaka and Kaimai tunnels. When not at work, Alan is a premier women's rugby coach. That's good to hear. In the Christchurch Club competition, having coached to provincial underage level. He's also, this is the important bit, a keen fisherman. As well as providing governance and engineering oversight of the Snake Creek Restoration Project, Alan is also the current chair of the North Canterbury Fish and Game Region, chair of a Ministry for the Environment project in the Upper Rakaia River, and a trustee of the Water and Wildlife Habitat Trust. Alan's passion is in stream restoration projects. So please welcome Alan to the stage.
Hi there, can everyone hear me okay? Can you hear me down the back? Okay, well thanks very much for inviting me here today to talk about the Snake Creek Restoration Project. I guess, where shall I start? Joan's just informed me that there are a bunch of ex-engineers and scientists in the room, so I'm probably about to be found out science-wise. But You're probably wondering, why is an electrical engineer standing here talking to us about stream restoration? And I probably should explain how that happened. So my family have had a batch at the Lower Selwyn Huts, which is at the mouth of the Selwyn River where it enters Te Waihora, Ellesmere. Since around the 1940s, my grandfather first brought the place, and my father, me, and now my sons go out there and recreate, basically. So I grew up around the lake, fishing and swimming in the Selwyn River. We used to swim down by the batches, and it was something we ordinarily did through the summer as kids. And I used to sort of marauder around the lake and do various things, and I had a great childhood and teenage years around the lake. And sadly, I think last week you might have heard about where the lake is at and a number of projects that may be happening around the lake. So 4 or 5 years, it might have been 6 or 7 years ago now, I was down at the batch, and I'd walked out onto the river, and I was standing on the bank, and I was looking around at the river that was suffering at that time from extreme low flow and an algae bloom. So it was looking pretty green and not particularly attractive. There weren't many birds around, there weren't any fish, there certainly weren't any trout to fish for. And I remember standing there looking around thinking, oh, it might be time to talk to Dad about selling the batch and moving on. And then I got to thinking about that as I was standing there, and I thought, no, I should probably try and do something to help. So that is how an electrical engineer become someone who has been involved with fish and game. So from that point on, so what I did, I'll go back one step. I spent the Christmas holidays, and I had about a week where I was just relaxing at home, and I thought what I'll do is I'll review all the literature I can find on the lake and the river, and I will write something. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to write, but I ended up writing an essay. I wasn't even sure what I was going to do with it, to be fair. So I wrote the essay, and I wasn't quite sure what to do from there, so I presented it to Fish and Game, and they very quickly said, would you like to become involved in Fish and Game and help us out? So that's how I ended up being involved in Fish and Game, and within a couple of years then became the chair. So I've been the chair of North Canterbury Fish and Game for the last 2 3-year periods, so I'm in the middle of the second one at the moment. So from that point, I started to hear a lot from a lot of experts around the lake issues and the river issues. And to put this into context from a trout fisherman's perspective, in 1968, they put a trap in just above Coes Ford. This is Fish and Game. And they trapped the brown trout migrating from the lake up the Selwyn River to spawn in the autumn. And they counted 14,000 fish that went through the trap. In 1985, Fish and Game put a trap in the same place and counted the fish going through the trap that year going up the river to spawn, and I think it numbered 40. So 14,000 migratory brown trout to 40, and you might think that's a pretty big collapse. Why did that happen? A whole bunch of things that scientists are probably better able to explain that than me, but water quality, water quantity, and all of those sorts of things. So while I was writing this essay, I read a lot of literature, and one of the things I read was a report from a scientist called Mark Taylor to ECAN, where he had been employed to go around the lake and look at the loss of spawning habitat for trout particularly, and he identified something like 85% of all spawning habitat had disappeared from the region. But one of the things he did do was he highlighted a number of places where they were still relatively functioning and he thought could probably be restored. And number one on his list was Snake Creek, which is where we ended up with in terms of restoring that, or attempting to restore that. And from that project I learned it was probably a bit of a hard landing for an engineer to learn a lot about science and ecology, but I did learn a lot, and hopefully can take those learnings going forward into other projects. All right, on that we'll jump in. So the Snake Creek project was born, and what happened was that we applied for funding from the Ministry for the Environment in the first round of Jobs for Nature funding, and we were lucky enough to be funded to improve a section of over 3 kilometres of the stream. And that was a 3-year project that we then ran from there. The big question that we had and we wanted to get some answers for was it possible to even restore a lowland spring-fed stream and significantly improve the diversity of species within it and the water quality? So I'll take one step back from there and say that although I started this journey thinking primarily about trout being a trout angler, I quickly learnt that if you have a well-functioning ecosystem and there are lots of trout around, then generally all species are around. And one of the first questions I run into was the one of, don't trout eat native fish? And the answer is they do, but I guess the other side of the equation is native fish will eat trout or juvenile trout as well. So ultimately, if the habitat is functioning well, all of the species will be present and do well. And so I learnt that pretty quickly, that in fact, rather than restoration projects for increasing trout and salmon numbers, these are actually just habitat restoration projects that enhance everything that lives in that habitat. So we set out to answer the question, could we actually do anything? So to give you some numbers around the Selwyn River, the mean low flow from the 90s to the 2010 had dropped by 60%. Irrigation during that period of the 90s went up by 60% in that catchment, and so the flow quantity had severely reduced in the river, and that it was impairing some of its functions. The double whammy of that is, while the flow reduces and the environmental inputs in terms of pollutants go up, then water quality goes down dramatically. So on the left is what we started with, which was Snake Creek. In the summer, monkey musk, which is, and I'm not a botanist, but it's a plant that grows from the toe of the stream, essentially blocks the whole stream, and that tends to hold up water and slow it down and enable the sediment that the water's carrying to drop out, and it's a self-perpetuating thing, drops out, provides soil for the monkey musk and other plants to grow. And so we end up with a poorly functioning stream which needs to be mechanically cleaned. So typically around the Selwyn area, at late summer, someone will come along to the stream in 2017 on the left with a digger, and they will go along with a digger and remove the monkey musk and plonk it on the bank. And in doing so, they were effectively disturbing all of the habitants within the stream itself and within the water, and also even in the gravels where they were disturbing gravels and removing good functioning gravels from the stream and putting them up on the bank. On the right, you'll see this was in last year, 2021. So that's a section of the very same stream where we have worked hard to change the bank profile and to plant up in that case carrick sector mainly. And what I'll point out about monkey musk, something that we work with the carricks unit from Canterbury University and John Harding's team. They discovered that monkey musk tends to grow from the toe of the bank outwards across the stream, and if you could effectively shade the toe of the bank, then the monkey musk wouldn't grow. So the premise was, if we could plant in a way that shaded the toe of the bank, we could prevent the monkey musk from blocking the stream, and then get rid of the need for the council to send a guy down with a digger to disturb the stream, and then let the stream start to function more naturally. It probably is worth pointing out that these small streams are spring-fed, but they're also highly modified, as in they've been mechanically straightened, and you can see that that's about 1.5 kilometres of just straight ditch. My understanding is before that happened, they would have meandered all over the place and been quite swampy and quite wet. To enable the area to be farmed, they've been mechanically altered. So although they're still a natural stream, they're highly modified. I might point out that the Water and Wildlife Habitat Trust actually run this project in conjunction with Fish and Game. One of the first big lessons that I learnt going through this process, though, was that to do any meaningful restoration of any large area, and I'm talking kilometres rather than metres, it actually needs to be a multi-agency effort. It's quite a lot of work, and it's not something that just one organisation can do. Also, much of the work requires consents from various parties, the district council, the regional council, and so forth. So some of the contributors to the project were the Ministry for the Environment, ECAN, Environment Canterbury, and DOC via its Living Waters program. Selwyn District Council were involved and very helpful, the Rata Foundation, and of course the landowners, because Snake Creek is mostly on private land. So everyone knows about the Queen's Chain and what that all means in terms of rivers and streams. But a lot of our small streams are actually just on private land, so they're not actually, they have no Queen's Chain applied. So these streams, in particular Snake Creek, is flowing across private land, and without the landowners' permission and being on board with the project, simply wouldn't be able to be done. So just a little bit about Snake Creek. It's actually a tributary of the Silver Stream, which runs into the Selwyn River just above Coes Ford. And I was just talking with Joan before about Coes Ford, and I was just talking about the fact that when I was a child, I remember a lot of Christchurch companies and firms used to go out there for their Christmas barbecues. And I remember really fondly as a kid being out there with lots of other kids and Father Christmas throwing lollies around, which is always good when you're a kid. But I remember swimming in the stream, and it was just never occurred to anyone then that you wouldn't be able to do that in the future, sadly. But so Snake Creek is about 4.6 kilometres long, and it runs into the Silver Stream just above Coes Ford. One of the issues with Coes Ford water quality is high levels of E. coli and other pollutants. And one of the main sources of that apparently is the Silver Stream system. So one of the things that we wanted to work on was whether we could do something about that and improve the water quality at Coes Ford. It's a relatively small catchment. It's 742 hectares. It's Flaxton silty looms. That's the soil type. Means nothing to me as an electrical engineer, but apparently that's the soil type. But what I do know is that there's a clay layer about 500, 600 mil below the surface, and below that there's a cobble layer. And the cobble layer is the bit that the trout and the insects like in the stream, and that's down about probably 1.5 metres below surface. That catchment, the 742 hectares, is primarily a dairy area in that part of the world. There are the occasional sheep and beef, but it's mostly dairy. And you'll see that in some of my pictures, and I'll explain the implication for that as we work through some of our work. One of the things we discovered when we looked at Snake Creek now is that it was heavily modified and straightened mechanically. And what that had done is it had turned it into basically one massively long run. And a run is an area of water that's fast flowing and reasonably shallow, but without turbulence, it's quite linear. And it's it's pretty much just homogeneous in terms of it's all the same. There's no complexity or anything for critters to live in. So typically, a well-functioning natural stream will have pools, ripples, and runs. Riffles are the same thing, but they have turbulence in them and larger rocks, and they have some complexity to the water flow, and that provides places for little critters and vertebrate insects and things to live, which is really important, as I discovered, for things to eat. So getting into the restoration, I would probably say that we did two things. So we dealt with the banks and the profiles, and we planted up the banks with a number of native species to provide shade at the toe to prevent the monkey musk, but to also provide a little bit of complexity of plants for insect life and other animals that live there. And please don't test me on the actual plants, because I'm not particularly great with plants, but the list of them are there, and all of their proper names. The second part of it was we dealt with the in-stream functioning. So we tried to take what was a long run and make it less homogeneous and create some complexity, and I'll show you some of the ways that we did that and what worked and what didn't. We learnt as we went along the way. So we started with the banks, and typically the bank profiles were due to years and years and years of mechanical removing of the monkey musk, had become overly steep, and the actual stream bed had become overly wide. And that has the effect of making the water very shallow, particularly in summer low flows, and it also makes it homogeneous. So the first job we did was we went in with diggers and we changed the bank profile, and we levelled them off, and we tried to take them from, I think, an average of something like 45 degrees was typical, and we tried to get that to something more like 15, 20 degrees or something like that. In fact, up there, an average of 19 degrees is what we achieved. Not perfect. One of the biggest issues that we had was we still had to work within the constraints of the fences either side of the stream. So the fences were already in place when we started this project, and the landowners were great, but they were very clear. You can do what you like between the fences, but you can't move the fences. So that's fair enough. It's their land. I understand that. So we worked hard on excavating the banks. One of the things we did do is we left the toe specifically in the bank to try and prevent any sediment running into the stream from our actual works. And that worked reasonably well. We also used cotton ball rolled up things to try and stop, when it rained, sediment from running off the raw banks before they vegetated up and into the stream, making things worse. It worked to a degree, although you'll see when I show you the sediment numbers, potentially one of the negative consequences of doing this type of work is you do get a slug of sediment for a year or so before things vegetate up and settle down. And I guess that's, you would say, you've got to break a few eggs to make an omelette, don't you? So something we may have to just accept. Sorry for my artistry. You've all just worked out I'm definitely not an artist. So we took the banks pre-battered that looked a little bit like the top drawing, so very steep-sided and over widened. And we did two things. So the second drawing down is what's called a two-stage ditch. And so what we did in a number of places is we narrowed up where we could the stream bed, and we allowed a bench above the stream bed so that several times, maybe 2 to 6 times a year, when the stream would flood, the floodwaters would go up onto that bench and deposit its silts up there, and on that bench, of course, we planted up various plants and sedges, and then typically in summer low flows, it would sit back down in the main channel, and that way we could narrow up the channel and create a little bit more depth and complexity in the water flow. So the bottom picture is what we did in a number of places, and we added some gravel bags, which I'll show you some pictures of, as a technique. We trialled to try and determine whether that would work as a simple, low-cost way of narrowing up the main channel but still allowing for flood flows. We did a lot, so as well as planting the banks and battering the banks, we also added a lot of in-stream features, and we did this to try and address the homogeneous nature of the channels. And we trialled lots of things, and this is where my kind of inner young boy wanting to play in the stream, which is effectively a big sandpit, came in, as we brought in a lot of different products, timber and also rocks, and I played with different shapes and styles of rock weirs and all sorts of structures, including embedding trees into the stream to provide a little bit of complexity. Some of it worked really well, some of it didn't work out as well as it did in theory, and I'll show you some examples of that. But the idea here was where we would place, in this case, a rock structure, we would increase the depth of the water behind, so upstream of the structure. We would create a little bit of fast scour through the structure and some nice clean gravels at the bottom of it, and then a little bit of complexity of flow below it. So rock weirs like this and flow deflectors like this worked really well. And one of my learnings was I trialled a lot of V-notch weirs and built out of timber so that the invertebrates could eat the timber, fixed to the stream bed to try and create the same situation. What I found was that I could design one to work perfectly at a particular flow, but the moment the flow went up or down, it just simply ceased to work. If it went down, it stopped working at all, and if it went up, the flow just went over it and you lost the effect. So I worked out really quickly, probably should have taken advice on this, that actually, unless with a stream that has a variable flow, those types of structures just don't work particularly well. What I did find was rock structures worked well across the whole range of the flows. And to give you some examples, Snake Creek might flow at 1 cubic metre per second to 3 cubic metres per second if it's in high flood flow, but its typical summer average flow is about 50 litres a second. So that's 3 cubic metres per second to 50 litres a second. There's a massive variability in flow. And creating a structure that works across that whole range was outside of my engineering ability. To give you a bit of an example of, and once again, sorry for my art, some of the things that we tried, and we tried various shapes and sizes and to see what would work and what wouldn't. One of the real big successes was the top one, what we ended up calling a tumbling rock weir, which is essentially a long, 3 metre long rock structure, and these rocks were all big enough that the flood flow wasn't going to move them. Placed so that we would have a nice fast bit of water through the middle to create a little bit of scour, and a little bit of a pool above and a little bit of a riffle below. But what happened with those is they tend to work and function well in all flows. So that was a really successful technique, as well as the narrowing and the edge deflectors worked really well. The standard rock weir, which was essentially just a small weir built out of rocks, was a bit of a fail, and we ended up removing the ones that we put in of those. This is an example, once again, my art again, sorry, of the type of, the way that we dealt with the whole 3 kilometres, and we looked at providing different structures in stream to create different flows and turn it from just a straight ditch of all the same to something with a bit of complexity. And the idea was with the rocks is they create little places for invertebrate insects to live. And one of the big ones that we were interested in was mayflies, which apparently land on the rock and then walk into the river or stream rather than land directly in the stream. So a mayfly won't go into the stream if there's no structure above it, apparently. There's something I learnt through this process. What we did see was the proof of that, because we did see an increase in the number of mayfly nymphs when we measured it. Something I should say, add as well, is because this was a Ministry for the Environment project, we did have scientists monitor the performance of all of this as we went through, and we did see an improvement in all the indicators that you would typically see, which was really encouraging. But we also would have to acknowledge that much more data is needed to be absolutely certain there was a long-term benefit to the actual species. So something that I learnt quite quickly is you can make a stream look pretty, but it doesn't necessarily mean it functions better. So, and in terms of functioning better, I mean more invertebrates for fish species to eat, the right type of algae and not the wrong type of algae. So, and starting at the bottom of the food chain, then all the other species will thrive. What did I just do then? Whoops. I talked about the stream narrowing. We trialled a number of things, but one of the things that we tried was we tried gravel bags and building the bank out with gravel bags. And what we found was that over time the gravel would bind up and become a structure that was quite strong and resisted flood flow events. And in that way we were able to narrow the stream up where it had been over-narrowed. And you can see the picture on the left where we've built out the bank with these bags, and we've narrowed up that stream and created a nice wee bit of velocity, and that will probably be in summer and reasonably low flow there. One of the things we did do is every now and again we would put a bag in with soil and we would plant a carex sector in it, like the top picture. And we did that to try and encourage the carex to grow. After 4 years now, that was an amazing success. Those carex loved that situation, and they are now massive and growing healthily and have really stabilised that bank. So if we were to look at that reach again now, you would just not know that we had done that. It just looks like it's just a standard bank and it's always been there. So this, and we tried this because this was an inexpensive way of dealing with the problem of over-widened channels. There's another example, so on the left, and I think this may be the same little bit, we narrowed up a section there and we've made it sinuous so that it's not just a straight run. We've made it bendy purposely. We weren't just bad at our jobs. And then we filled in the inside of those bags with soil and created a bank. And so essentially we took an over-widened channel and we narrowed it up. And then we planted it up, and the picture on the right is what it looks like today. You can't even really see what we did. It's kind of grown up. And you can see, importantly, there's no monkey musk growing across the channel there. So this section of the stream, and where we've done this in other places, no longer needs mechanical cleaning, which is an important point. The council, when you do this type of work, don't need to maintain it. It just looks after itself from there on. Oh gosh, my art is great. One of the things I learnt, not being a hydraulic engineer, was that slope of the stream is extremely important. And I tried all sorts of things to make water flow faster on a flat slope. It works with electrons. It didn't work, no matter what I did. So in the end, eventually I worked out that I needed to identify where the slope was and work with the slope. And what I found really quickly was that worked really well. So what I ended up doing was looking at the flat sections of the stream and treating them completely differently. And so I've even written in this wee drawing that the flat sections, and that's below 0.5% of slope, and that's the kind of slope where I just couldn't make any improvement to the flow. We just left them and planted them out as habitat for creatures to live, trout and native species like eel. On that, longfin eel weren't really up in this stream prior to the restoration. I vividly remember digging a sediment trap, and as we'd finished this sediment trap and the water is starting to clear, this massive, about 2 foot long, quite old longfin eel swam straight into the hole and went, "You beauty." So I've got a new home. So now if we were to go there, there are quite a few longfin eels living there now, and I can testify to the fact that they will quite happily eat juvenile trout, because I watched them doing it one day. And I got in there to do some weeding and made it muddy. As I'm pulling the weeds out, I turn around and there's this eel swimming around just whacking little baby trout that have been disturbed and gobbling them as fast as he could go. I was a bit aggrieved about that because I thought they might have been fish I might catch, but I've been told by the scientists that that's natural and not to be too worried about it. But what I learnt was you need to start with the slope and work with the slope, and no amount of trying to make stuff happen without slope works. The scientists in here are probably just thinking, oh, if only I'd just gone to university. One of the things that I did do a wee bit of work on was sediment traps, and what we found was these systems are running through quite intensively farmed farmland, mostly dairy farms. And so sediment and overland flow, when in flood events, there's a huge amount of sediment getting into these systems. And so what the sediment does is it effectively gets into the stream, and then it settles out and it fills all the interstitial spaces in the cobbles. The interstitial spaces being the little gaps in the cobbles in the stream bed. And John Harding explained to me that it was like a little 10-storey building for invertebrates, like a condo, and all the invertebrates are living in all the little spaces in the cobbles. But when you fill that up with sediment, they simply have nowhere to live, so they disappear. And if they disappear, so do all the species that live off them and feed off them disappear too. So if you get that wrong, no amount of planting above the water is going to improve anything. So it has to be, you have to do both. You have to do in-stream, you have to prevent sediment from getting in there and deal with the sediment that did. We did that by creating a number of sediment traps. And a sediment trap is really just code for a pool. So a deep, slow part of the stream where the velocity of the water would slow down to the point where the sediment would drop out of suspension, and then it could be removed mechanically once a year, which is what we do at Snake Creek. And you can see the kind of sludge that we're removing from sediments. And somewhere in here I've got some numbers of what we took out. 100 tonnes. 100 tonnes we took out over the 2.5-year period out of a stream that is 2 metres wide with an average flow of 70 litres a second. 100 tonnes is significant. I was quite shocked by that. So it seems like through the project we identified that one of the it's starting to become more spoken about, but one of the things that is not spoken a lot of in terms of pollutants in small streams is sediment. And sediment actually impairs the functioning quite badly. And some of our farming practices end up with quite significant amounts of sediment entering these streams. And an example is the wee picture there. That's a wee side tributary of Snake Creek. It was poorly vegetated. If not, there was you can see the fence post right on the stream boundary. There's no riparian margin. And in flood events and high flood flow events, sediment just flows straight into that and straight into Snake Creek, and potentially wrecking all of the work that we had done. To give you some numbers, you can see here the various places we remove sediment from, and not totally, but a declining amount of sediment over time, which we felt was due to the increased vegetation as things grew and matured. But we're talking about, and this is a very small system, a small catchment, and extremely small flows, I mean, that's a significant amount of sediment getting in there. And if you extrapolate that out over its whole length, and then extrapolate that out over the whole Selwyn system, there must be a massive amount of sediment being transported through the system. And I need to put a caveat on that, because the hydraulic engineers tell me that that's actually natural and normal, that rivers are just transport systems to take material from the eroding mountains to the sea, and that's a natural process. I guess what I'm saying is that this is unnaturally high due to the land use around the stream. So sediment is and can be natural. But massive amounts of sediment. In terms of the sediment trap design, we weren't sure really where to start with, so we started with 10 diameters of the stream, which is 20 metres, if we could, but we ended up with a number at 10, and as deep and as wide as reasonably practical. In other words, get the water moving as slow as possible. I said sediment traps are really code for pools. One of the things we did note was particularly eels, but other species of fish just loved them. It was just a nice place they could go and hide and get in under the bank. And we typically made, this is a small stream with a kind of average depth of maybe 200-300 millimetres. We made some of these sediment traps 2 metres deep. Well, a lot of fish lived in those. Gosh, one of the other things that we did is in terms of trying to prevent the sediment flowing into the stream in the first case seems to be, the sediment trap is potentially the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. To put the fence at the top of the cliff, what we trialled was identifying where there were overland flow paths, and this is a situation in Snake Creek. Before we installed this small pond / detention basin, let's call it a wetland, what used to happen was in a rain event, all of the purple flow angle, all the rain would flow onto the laneway and then flow overland into the creek and introduce massive amounts of sediment. But even worse than that, that laneway is a dairy farm laneway, and I'm not sure if you guys have ever walked down one of those. It's about ankle deep, and I'm not going to say it, but you know what. And that as well all goes into the creek, contributing to the E. coli problem that occurs down at the Silver Stream and then goes forward. So what we did was we convinced the farmer it would be a great thing for him to just section off a wee bit of land, and it's not particularly big, sort of 30 metres by 20 metres, if that. And we dug a detention basin and we planted it all up, and then we put a pipe from that at high level into the stream, and we tried to intercept that overland flow. And that was relatively easy to do, relatively inexpensive, and it wasn't perfect. To make it perfect, you probably need a couple of acres. Nothing, that wasn't even close to perfect, but it actually did quite a good job. And that enables, if required, a digger to come along and empty the sediment from that basin to maintain its volume. And planting all that up just helped use some of the sediment that was coming in. So I'm looking at the clock and need to leave a bit of time for questions, but some key findings in terms of this project is that the shading provided by the carrot sector plants planted at the toe of the bank, in terms of that reducing or actually removing the need to mechanically clear these drains, worked really well. It's an extremely effective tactic. It also improved vegetation into the stream, which invertebrates also eat. So it had a multi kind of function. But that, in terms of our key things, that was a great success. And you'll see that in a number of places now around the Canterbury Plains, and I think this is quite well known now. Sediment is a major problem. We just talked about it, and absolutely, I think it's becoming more accepted now, but a serious pollutant in these small streams. And preventing it from getting in the stream is the fence at the top of the cliff. If you can't do that successfully, then putting in sediment traps and controlling it improves things and improves the situation. We did a lot of quarterly monitoring as well. We did things like we counted the bugs or the invertebrates, and we did a lot of testing. We did nitrate testing and phosphorus and all the other normal pollutants that occur in these streams. And we did that for the 3-year period. What we found was, it was great, it's great data, but a 3-year data set is just not enough to get a consistent trend. Everything trended in the right way, but we couldn't put our hand on our heart and say that it had completely solved the problem. More testing and more understanding of these systems are required, and that's a general comment probably. Almost every scientist I've ever met will tell you need to do more testing, more work. Whoops, done it again. You probably can't really see that very well, but what you can see is 4 test sites and a general trend up in the number of invertebrates found and tested. Not conclusive because the data set's too small, but what we were able to show was there was absolutely an improvement and a reaction to the work that we did. We were also able to see that there was a lot less sediment in the bottom of the system after the 3-year period, and the cobbles were cleaner, and the fish species had increased. So we also counted number of fish species as well, and there was a general trend. It was all pretty similar to that. They're all trending up slightly, showing a good response to the work that we'd done. One of the other great things of doing this project, and that's me standing there with some bank bags and some children from, I think that was Springston South School. It's a wonderful opportunity to educate our young people about the need to look after our environment and to consider it when we're going about our daily business. Most of those kids probably were rural based, probably come from farms. They were incredible actually. They were like little sponges, and it was really encouraging to see and hear their thoughts about the world and the environment that we live in. So that was a real benefit that I didn't expect actually, the amount of education from young people. And I was really pleasantly surprised with the reaction generally from young people about this kind of work. They seemed very open-minded about what we were doing and why we were doing it and the need to look after the place. So that's it. Thanks everyone. So.
We're clearly open to questions.
Yes, absolutely.
Jacqueline, could you please describe the content of this sediment?
The makeup is in terms of material. Gosh, you got me there. That's getting a bit sciencey, but yeah, it was really fine sediment, and it was coming straight off the topsoil of the paddocks in heavy rain, and it was carrying quite a lot of fecal matter, and it was really high in E. coli, so which would bind to the sediment and end up in the stream. Difficulty with the really fine sediment is it's really hard to drop out in a sediment trap. So the water needs to be going really slow or be quite still for it to settle out of suspension. Whereas a coarser product is quite easy to trap. So it's really fine mucky stuff. I think you saw the picture of it. It was really gluky. I'm not sure if that's a word.
Is there any link to the dairy effluent?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, there is. Yep. And I probably should say that I'm not advocating that we don't farm our land, but I think we can do it in a lot better way than we maybe are at the moment. I think we're having some unintended consequences.
Ivor Watson, do you know how it got the name Snake? And the other question I have is, in one of the earlier talks we had, there was a lot of involvement from the local Maori community. I didn't see that the people that you had involved in the projects.
Yeah, so first question, I've got no idea why it's called Snake Creek. I'm not sure. I have to go back and look at some early history. In terms of iwi, they were involved but not actively in this project. So they were interested in the results, they were interested in what we were doing, and they kind of, they took a bit of a neutral stance. I'm hoping, and moving forward, and certainly in our next project, which is up in the Rakaia catchment, they're more involved. And I think we've been able to show them the benefit of what we were doing. And their kind of concern initially was, well, this is actually just a project to introduce species. When they saw the longfin eel response to the change in the environment, I think they felt a lot more comfortable with it. I'm hoping they need to be a partner of this to do anything meaningfully going forward.
Kia ora, Peter Gord.
G'day.
Thanks for the work you're doing there. That's obviously very beneficial for the local people and for the environment. I take it that Snake Creek feeds Coes Ford, and secondly, and this is more my question, what public access is there to Snake Creek? Can we go and look at it ourselves, for example?
Yeah, good question. So yeah, Snake Creek is a tributary of Coes Ford. It comes in just at the very top of where the reserve is. It just comes in with Silverstream there, and Silverstream and Snake Creek connect together about 200 metres up that stream. So it comes in there. Access, really difficult because it's private property. There is a Lynn's piece of land down at the bottom, and at the moment I think ECAN and the District Council are looking at building a constructed wetland there. That in theory you could access, but it's kind of landlocked. And this is one of the problems with some of these waterways, certainly a problem for fish and game and fishermen and public access to water, is that often these small streams are on private property. Oh, yep, got another question. Did that answer your question okay? Yeah, so you can see it from the Leaston, the Springston-Leaston Road. You can stop in a farmer's gate there and look up and down it, but yeah, you can't go on it unfortunately.
Hello, Suzanne Silver.
Hello.
I was ringing up, not ringing, I've got the phone in my hand. I was wondering, it started really with you talking about fishing. Are you fishing this area, or is it possible?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Interesting. No, most people don't fish this area. In fact, I've never fished it. It's primarily a rearing habitat for fish. If you're talking about trout and fishing, the trout will come up into Snake Creek and spawn. The small juveniles will live there and grow, and then at some point they will enter the Selwyn River, where they become fishable for. But people typically, this is a very small waterway, it would be very difficult to fish. Well, you wouldn't now that we've put carrot sectorall up it.
I have a question with regards to Lake Ellesmere, Te Waihora. What percentage of the inflow to the lake is represented by streams such as Snake Creek? In other words, what you could do to all the small streams, is that significant for Lake Ellesmere?
I guess the Selwyn is the main input to the lake because it has high flood flows in the winter period. But generally through the summer, the main flow of the Selwyn actually is often Silverstream and Snake Creek, particularly when it's very low. And you can see it's almost dried up at the main road bridge, but down at Coes Ford there's still a wee bit of water in it. So they're quite significant. And it's, I guess if you add them all up, it would be very significant. If you could do that to every stream inflowing into Ellesmere, it would be a much better place.
So is Snake Creek a tenth of it or a fifth of it? Or?
It's probably less. It's probably less than that. To be fair, Snake Creek's volume mean flow is about 70 litres a second, so it's not a massive amount of water, but it's constant all year round.
Yep. Is there another question there? Oh yes.
Yeah, Hugh Perkins. Are they landowners, as a result of the work that you've done and this issue about the runoff and the sill, are they showing any interest in adjusting their farming systems to try and reduce the runoff?
Yeah, the landowners were fantastic, and I have to say they were great. They let us do the work. They let us access their property to do the work, and they were relatively open to where we were able to point out issues. They invariably were quite happy to try and solve them the best way we could. So we did a number of things. One of the things we tried was creating a berm along the edge of the stream to prevent surface runoff off the paddock into the stream. So they were happy to look at different options to do things, and they did accept what we were able to show them, and they could certainly see the benefit to doing the work that we did. And probably, you know, I kept telling them anyway that the work we were doing was adding value to their property.
Just the last one, I'll pitch you another question. Cost, it's being funded by the Ministry of Environment and whatever. Do you think that that same funding might be available for all the other spring-fed streams?
Over time, yes. When we started the project, what we wanted to try and do was spend around 100,000 a kilometre. That was our target. We actually ended up spending probably, at the end, probably 200,000 a kilometre. And the reason that we were doing that is we have seen restoration projects that are absolutely fantastic, but they're about $1 million a kilometre. And when you extrapolate that out, just over the streams flowing into Te Waihora, but if you consider Canterbury and then the rest of the country, I mean, it's a huge number. So in time, I think in little bits things will get improved. So we're doing another project very similar to Snake Creek in the headwaters of the Rakaia. And that's probably double the size, and that involved actually purchasing 50 hectares of the farmer's land to enable us to redivert a stream that was diverted in the 1950s and dewatered. Yeah, so there are lots of these projects going on now, but there's an awful lot to do if you think about the lineal meterage of all the streams that we have. Not all of them need to be restored, but we should at least start with the high value ones, the ones that give us the best bang for our buck, I guess.
It's my pleasant task to thank you, Alan. So,
Thank you.
what really interesting talk. Interesting fact as well, I'm also an electrical engineer.
Oh,
And I've
would
also
you like to
probably
come and do some stream work?
I could do that. But also spent a lot of my youth from the early days of carrying my father's net on the trout streams.
Yes.
And I'm hoping to do that in the coming up Take a Kid Fishing Day,
Oh, right. Yes. Yep.
which is the Groins,
Yes, that's right.
for those of us that know the area.
Yep.
Two quick questions. The salmon returns, they're a bit disappointing, aren't they?
Last year we had the best salmon returns in 10 years. So we changed getting off the subject, but 2 years ago we went to Parliament and we got a law change to enable us to implement a season bag limit for salmon. And some salmon fishermen weren't happy with us, but we decided that each person should only kill 2 salmon per season. And the effect of that was that our harvest rate went from 60% in the Rakaia River to 30% of the population. And I think we had 3,500 salmon spawning in the headwaters of the Rakaia. The previous year we had about 600 or 700, I think, off the top of my head. So we saw quite a nice response. So completely different from Snake Creek, but still.
I guess from the Waimak point of view, perhaps not so good, but the Rakaia sounds good.
The Waimak, the Waimak had a response in terms of its wild fishery. It went from 300 to 500, but it didn't have as big a response. And we're still, our scientists at Fish and Game are still trying to understand why the response to the change was suppressed in that river. Most other rivers were similar to the Rakaia.
Oh, thanks. I spent some time yesterday looking through your very extensive website and the policy statements relating to what species you're actually into sort of monitoring and so on. It doesn't include Canada geese, and I think that does need some attention.
Yeah, my personal view is I'm shocked because I actually enjoy hunting Canada geese, but yeah, they were removed from Fish and Game about 6 or 8 years ago and declassified as a sports bird. Yeah, so it's now a pest, unfortunately.
Is there any sign that you could pick that up and get them back on the list?
I would love to do that. The staff at Fish and Game just look at me and shake their head whenever I say it. So I don't think that's. I would like in the future that to happen, but I don't see that happening anytime soon.
The last point, and this could be a left field one, but sustainability. We've seen some of your really impressive work that you've done on Snake Creek. So I'm looking at it from a macro point of view. Sustainability, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Can I sort of throw it out there to everyone here today? How many of you actually know about the UN Sustainable Development Goals? Wow, that's not good.
No.
Somehow we need to get the message out there, because in terms of teams, teams that together everyone achieves more. You've illustrated that once or twice.
Yeah.
But we need to actually get this team thing going in terms of sustainability.
It is beginning to happen, although I've got to go and do some reading. But WSP, for instance, we have a target by 2030. None of our designs, and we do most of the government work, we're ex-ministerial works, they will all be carbon zero, neutral, by 2030.
And that is the
our
main
goal.
Well, that's the SDG sort of international goal.
That's right. Yep.
Well, thank you. Do appreciate.
Thank you very much.